Welcome to CGT Square Talk, where top experts in the industry share their groundbreaking journeys. Brought to you by BlueSquared, your strategic digital partner.
What outages? Everybody's talking about outages.
Evidently, you haven't heard.
Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Let me go fix my hair. I just got out of the shower after a ride.
Oh, yeah, you look like hell.
How are you guys doing?
We're good. How are you?
Good.
All right, Gary. So, hey, man, it's good to see you. I know it's late for you, right? What are we looking at? We're looking at almost 8 o'clock in the evening because you're out in Belfast, right? Visiting for the month. We wanted to talk about a little bit with you about some of your experience. You have some really interesting experience, first of all, right? For those of you that don't know, Gary's one of our BlueSquared guys. He handles a lot of architecture, design, development, oversight activities at different clients. He's actually a rock star in that regard. And one of the things you've been working on is event-based architecture, right? And integrations. And I think that would be kind of interesting to first. How did you even, get into? Have you done that a lot? Have you been interested in that, before, or is that something that just you kind of fell into?
Well, it's interesting. Most of my career, I've always been involved in integrations, but integrations of a very different flavor. Integrations that are more point to point, such that if one of the points failed, the integration failed. And what's very interesting about the event-driven architecture is that there's built-in robustness into the transaction. So it's guaranteed eventually to get there. And it brings up these things. I use the word eventually. Eventually there, we do talk about eventual consistency. With the event-driven architecture, we're sending messages around, and that's how we integrate. And that takes time. Sometimes it's under a second or even shorter, but it can sometimes get stuck and then there'd be retries. But we know that it would be guaranteed eventually to get there and all systems would be up to date. So event-driven architecture has been around probably around 20 years, and it really helps with, it's both a philosophy and a technology. The philosophy being we want to eliminate dependencies. If a system is responsible for taking an order, it should be able to take that order. It should not fail to take the order because the system that's receiving it is down and can't take orders at the minute or can't take the update of that order at that point in time. Once the update takes place, it must be able to finish its work, and we consider that done. At that point in time, that's the event. The event is a past tense. It happened. Here is the new order. Here is the order update. And that finds its way into some kind of technology like a message queue where it is distributed out on a publish subscribe basis to the different applications that are interested in it. The dependency part of it is that we don't try and stop that order from going through because there was a failure in one of those subscribers. The subscriber themselves are responsible for dealing with the order. They're dealing with the problem that they might have that's stopping them from updating it, and the application itself that produced it is free to continue on with its work. So that fit in very, very well with the architecture that we're developing in the treatment and the clinical stuff that we're doing. And I think we did in the end about 75 different events, and a couple of them were more traditional, restful type, interactive, maybe 2, and the rest of them were all event driven. So it really worked very, very well for that.
So what when you talk about this, obviously you were trying to address some challenges, right? And maybe that'd be interesting to hear what the challenges were. And do you think they're different whether you're a larger company dealing with, this type of situation, or you're looking at systems versus a smaller company who might be just starting to think about this stuff?
I don't think size matters so much with the actual implementation of the solution. Some of the challenges that it addresses is this. I think the major one that jumps out for me is the consistency across the applications. Integrations can become very, very flaky if you are always waiting for that application to consume the update, and it can't. And that means the system that's trying to perform the update is either going to hang up, it's going to wait until that application, or it's going to fail. And you've probably seen it in the early days of the web when you and maybe entered an order and you hit save and it said there was a problem. And you say to yourself, where does that leave me? I have to undo my form. I've got to lose all the work that I've done. Those days don't really, they're gone now. Because we have this idea of being able to, commit the event and send and deal with it separately in some kind of back-end microservice. So I think the major challenge is really that overall application resilience.
Yeah.
Interesting. So does that mean, from what you're saying, what I'm trying to figure out, does that mean that you also want to make sure that when you have so many different applications within your infrastructure, that the data that lives within those applications have to kind of match to each other, or consistently kept up to date to make sure that things fly between the applications?
Yeah. The event itself, the events that we've been developing, the 75 that I refer to, all pertain to transactional data. The master data alignment happens separately, and there are different tools for managing that. Technically or theoretically, you could synchronize master data through event-driven architecture and event-driven architecture as well. But honestly, there's better ways and better tools out there for dealing with that. But you're absolutely right. There's an inherent assumption that the data between the systems is synchronized. If there is such a dependency, and again, that comes back to the dependence oriented thinking, where we say that if there's a dependency, we formalize it. So if we agree that customers have the same ID, then we must formalize that process for synchronizing customers. Or if there is if there's a dependency and we can eliminate it, we try to get rid of it. So if we don't need to synchronize the ID, maybe there's only a need for a target system to show the name and not necessarily do a lookup on a local master data, then we would try it. We wouldn't say, well, we better sync up master data. We can eliminate that, so we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't have to do it.
That's an interesting point. So that allows for a lot more flexibility and scalability too, right? In that case. Yes. So you can scale it easier and be a lot more flexible in terms of adding peripheral applications to your infrastructure.
Yes, and it also allows you to produce like a directory of services. You can say, here are all the things within my application platform that produce data. This one produces an order. This one produces a courier update. And that means other applications within the enterprise can see that directory of services, and they can say, oh, I'm interested in that, and subscribe to the data and also get it as well. And they're getting it well, we use JSON. There's no real hard rule about it, but they're getting it in a common format, a well understood format. So that's one of the key advantages, is just the ability to open up the application and make future integrations easier. A lot of these larger companies, the larger enterprises, are really into publishing their data that they have in these isolated silos and making it available for others to use. And the event-driven architecture lends itself very well to that.
Did you say they are willing to, or they are not willing?
They are. They are looking to try to publish. Yeah.
So you said size doesn't really matter in terms of company as you're looking at this stuff, but let's say you're an earlier stage company, right? Maybe you're in clinical trial going from phase 2 to phase 3 or something, and you're starting to really ramp up systems. And as you're out there looking at systems or developing them, what should they be looking for? What kind of, or does it matter really at that stage?
The applications, I think a lot of the big software application vendors, and probably a lot of the small ones as well, are looking more to provide these hooks, these lifecycle hooks, where you can produce the event. There's many. RabbitMQ, for example, as an open source application, is a really nice way to manage the robust queues and be able to send events throughout the enterprise with publish subscribe kind of architecture. So you can get activated pretty quickly with things like that. The underlying application that you develop, of course, has to be developed in that way that at the end of the transaction, when you've updated the order or whatever, the event should be produced, put into a queue, and wait, and then at that point in time, it would be routed out. So when you're building the applications or looking at an application, it's really important to see that they have those kinds of lifecycle hooks where you can produce events. If they don't have that and you're into customization, or if you're writing from scratch, it's not that difficult, because it's really just a snapshot of the data at that point in time that we're looking at, and we want to just develop an event around that. But there is probably some common data that every event would have, like it would have an event type, a source system, a target system, things like that. And you would probably develop something of a schema, although the body would change because the actual transactions change from place to place. There would be a common, well, we call it header data, where we would be able to say, here's the different things that are common with all of these events. And that just helps with an overall, I suppose, grammar or language for your enterprise for this kind of event-driven architecture.
So they really should, as you're evaluating systems to acquire a system, it's doubtful they're going to build something from scratch, right, at that stage of the game, when their capital is trying to be used really for the clinical trial work itself. But they should really be kind of looking at, do the vendors provide this type of architecture, right, so that it's more scalable. And I would imagine, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if these companies get acquired, it's a little bit easier then to flow into the new ecosystem. Would that be the case?
Absolutely, because your key data, the key transactions, the key business activity that's going on is being published in a very understandable and reliable way. So hooking into another system is much more straightforward.
Right.
Whereas a point-to-point integration, you're very much tailoring it to the application that's asking and the application that's producing. That kind of integration, whether it be some kind of interactive call, you would have to break that and rebuild it in any other target system that the acquiring company would have.
For the company.
Sorry, I was just going to say a lot of a thing that we talked a little bit about this directory, and I think that's an important point to drill into as well, is that we really list out our services and capabilities at the platform level, such that we have, we break it down in a way that not only can you is it a way to communicate and group features and functions together, but it also means that you can replace those services if necessary. Either you choose a different vendor, some kind of different solution to address that service. And the event-driven architecture is very key to that. These events, because the event itself, it doesn't use customer language the way we designed them. We use business standard language. When it comes to things like a treatment order, we would call a treatment order, and we wouldn't give it some sort of local name. And that allows for applications to be switched out and map to another application in the future. So I think it's a key aspect of this, is the ability to, first of all, define your services and capabilities, view them as the event or events that match those services and capabilities. And then when you switch them out, you have the event language, the integration, so to speak, already predefined.
Or if you're changing, excuse me, or if you're changing vendors, right? I remember we were working together on a project where we were talking about scheduling, and we were going to start actually with a G sheet, right?
Yep.
That had the ability to grab an API call, and then the idea was that was eventually going to grow into a more robust scheduling tool, right? And I think what you're talking about is that ability to quickly, especially in cell and gene, where you've got to be able to react quickly, to swap out that G sheet for then a more robust, more robust service or application.
Yes, because the producing systems and the subscribing systems, we would have those events predefined. When we took the new system, we would be saying, here's what we need to interface, here's what we need you to consume. If it's, for example, a statement of demand in a scheduling tool, where this is when we want to produce something, this is our object that covers that, and this is what we need you to map to. So on their side, the application, the new application for scheduling would have to map to that event and consume that event, all of which would be reasonably easy to do, assuming they have their own APIs, which they would do, most likely.
One would hope.
Yeah.
So for the company of any size, whether small or big, data analytics is a big key, right? So everybody likes to look at data, analyze it, come up with something that they can learn off of that data. Can you talk a little bit about the event-driven architecture and how that fits in within the analytical world?
Well, one of the things that we've done with these events, if you think about it, almost if you can just imagine a network of roads with traffic moving back and forth, all the time. Let's just say that's our event flow throughout the platform. What we did was we tapped into that traffic information and we took a copy of every single event and we stored in a database. And this is, we're calling this the Event Sourcing Hub. And it isn't what's called an event sourcing database. There is no updates within this database. It's append only. Every event that's produced, regardless of where it is sourced from, gets appended only into that database. And this allows us to do a number of things. First of all, we can get a very good audit trail of everything that happened. We can replay data back to a certain point in time, forward and back to a certain point in time. And the critical part of this is what you're asking about, which is analytics. We can materialize views. We can keep state of views in any kind of materialized way that we like. We can group multiple events together and represent that in a more traditional database and keep that state up to date. So every time the event comes in, we keep the table up to date. So perhaps there's an overall view of the patient with all their orders, and as two normal relational database tables. We can as each event comes in, we would keep that materialized view up to date, and then just like we did, this is more of a traditional kind of API. We could publish that API and say, if you want your Tableau to come in and access that, you can access it. We can also use that data for detection of business exceptions. So if we know that the order should have been picked up a day ago, we can have agents in the background, and this is something that we plan to do, where we can say, oh, it wasn't picked up. Let's create a business exception that covers that. So the event sourcing database is this append-only store of every event that happened. It's a NoSQL database. It's got no schema, and we can use that to activate things like materialized views. We can use it to detect things like business anomalies, some sort of unhappy path. And also, it allows us from an audit perspective to be able to, at any point in time, view exactly what happened, who did it, and even replay that back in time. Well, what was it a week ago? And we can go all the way back with that as well. So the event-driven architecture as a way of communicating is wonderful, but this side effect that we got from it, this event sourcing hub, is really a real value add.
So how does that work? Cool. What do you? Sorry, Armen, go ahead.
Sorry. It's actually really cool because it sparked a little bit of a thought for me. Can that be also used in the future for learning, for example?
Yes.
Like a machine learning?
Yeah, we're talking about that as well. You know, that you can clearly have that data as training data for some sort of predictive technology. Yeah.
Very cool.
So the hub, so how is that working? What are you say your story, you're grabbing the event. What does that mean exactly?
Well, when we talked earlier about publishers and subscribers, let's just think of the event sourcing hub as a subscriber to everything. And that means everything that gets produced and goes through the platform gets also published to the event sourcing hub, and they ingest that and append it into this NoSQL database. It's actually amazingly simple to implement, but that's only because we have an event source. We've got an event-driven architecture and places where we can do things like that. But yeah,
right. That part is easy, but the beginning part is harder, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Excuse me. So you're also, I think you're trying to create the event-driven architecture or the structure of this as a standard, right? That other people can use. Am I right about that?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, when we sat down with and actually the process of how we went through that design the designing of the events could be interesting as well.
Yeah.
We sat down with subject matter experts and domain experts from both the business and some from IT as well. And we actually worked in a very focused group. So originally the team was very large and it was hard to move things along, but we eventually pared that down to a good core group of people. We had a very well documented business process. So we knew how the data was meant to flow. We knew how the transaction was meant to go from beginning to end and the happy path. And what we did then was we asked what happens when we, and then whatever the event would be at that point in time, what happens when the biospecimen is collected? What happens when the finished product is requested? And we followed that process all the way through, and each of those became an event. Then we went and talked about the event content itself. And like I said, this was primarily on me to do this, but I think bigger companies could take more time over it. We decided to build this sort of grammar of common language and not to use specific corporate words, try to find something that was more generic and try to follow certain patterns as well. Like if something is an expected date, let's always call it an expected date. And then let's not default back to plan somewhere else. Or, so we tried our best to keep these things in synchronization as much as possible and keep a good agreement across all of the events. That left us in the end with I think an event-driven architecture that could be used anywhere. I could give that to anyone in any pharmaceutical company, and they would know what we're talking about. They would know. They wouldn't say, what does this word mean? What does this mean? They would understand exactly what these terms mean.
Could somebody actually leverage the work that you've already done, or is that, or is it proprietary to I know that sometimes customers that we deal with, they want to own the IP sometimes, but I'm not sure that's the case in this instance.
I think there's a desire to get this. There was some discussion that I wasn't personally involved in to bring this to the Bioforum and to try and publish it as a industry standard. It is published internally as a open API 3.0. So that's how we defined the service-oriented architecture. So
internally,
it's very easy to make it a public specification. Right. But it would need, I think that process requires more than just putting it on a GitHub somewhere.
Right, of course. Well, there's, I'm sure, a lot of approvals that have to happen to be able to do that.
And localized approvals for the companies too, right? So it has to fit in within their own.
So when you first jumped in, obviously, so I think, as I recall, because I think we worked on this a little bit together, I think when you first jumped into this project, it was really just a vision that somebody handed you, right? And that you kind of had to get the whole team, the different teams, the different streams that were involved, kind of all marching in the same direction, right? To be able to realize this. How was that for you? What were the challenges that you had to overcome, and how did you do that?
Well, there's a couple of things. There was the challenge, of course, of just bringing a lot of people together and asking them to agree on something. That in itself is a challenge, but when you have multiple vendors, that also becomes a challenge. There's competitive thoughts at times. And I have to admit, I had some good help. I had some good people who I worked with who were very, very skilled in building teams. And together, we more or less developed an attitude of cooperation. And we decided up front and we instilled in the vendors that we were one team and that we were working on this together. And there really isn't any point in complaining or resisting with what we're trying to do. It's better just to get on board with the process and work through it. A little
arm twisting, it sounded like there, Gary.
Yeah. There wasn't any need for that. But at times, I think at the beginning, we could see how a process that like what we're trying to do, where we're trying to ask these two systems to talk to each other, to try and get them to agree, there was a feeling that could actually become a very difficult process. But we managed to bring that together in a way that we became one team. Now, we knew in reality we weren't one team. We knew these were different vendors, but we all had a job to do, and we had a very short period of time to do it. And we offered them the easiest path forward to get that done. And again, I'm very grateful to the team that I work with, who were very skilled also in being able to bring people together.
So how many different vendors and streams were there?
Well, there were two main vendors: the treatment management platform and the treatment center platform. But we also had BlueSquared, of course, with the Courier Cloud, and we had labeling involved in there as well. So these were much less involved.
And you also had there were a couple internal teams too, right?
It was, yeah, we have an ERP with the SAP ERP team that was involved. That was a big project as well, because it was almost a whole new set of events that would be driven from the treatment management platform. But yeah.
And then the integration layer guys, right?
Yeah, but the integration layer was with the MuleSoft team, and yeah.
Right. So that's at least 5. Plus, then if you throw scheduling and some of the other ones in there, that might show up at any time. That's quite that's quite a bit to wrangle, actually, successfully. So
and one of the things we did was we developed a process, and one of the key parts of that process was a definition of done, where we said, well, each vendor should deliver together. So when we define an event together, we plan it together, and we deliver it together. And then we found out that would be actually quite difficult. And so we got a little bit flexible, and we said, look, at least deliver it within one sprint. Can you do that? And most of the time they could deliver within one sprint. Now, what that allowed us to do is if we were one sprint apart, we could then plan the handover to DevOps, who inherit the event for testing and so forth. And I think that was the real turnaround point in time, when things just suddenly we were struggling over the first event and the second event. And now all of a sudden, after 2 months, we delivered 27 events. And it happened just overnight. Everything just went smoothly once we did that. So key part of that, again, just to summarize, was we made agreements with the vendors, informal contracts, basically saying, look, can you please deliver within one sprint, which most of the time they were able to do. That allowed our MuleSoft guys, who were really tying the two together, to be able to understand when they were needed. And once we knew when they were needed, they could then tell DevOps what was coming. And it allowed us to keep the process very well planned and very well, organized. And like I say, it just worked. It was quite an interesting process, because it was quite difficult getting those first few events out the door, I have to say.
Right. Well, and I mean, I should say that you were actually building a lot from scratch, and you were helping the vendors kind of evolve their applications. But if someone's going out to evaluate software, let's say that they, again, with the case of an earlier stage company that's maybe not have a commercial product yet, but is in the clinical phase, and they're starting to build their systems, when they evaluate this and they find that, okay, one side is event driven and the other side is event driven, they're not going to necessarily have some of the same challenges that you had to face, right? They're really going to focus more on the middle part and how to get those two to work together. Is that?
I would think so. I would also think that if we had a published specification, their lives would be even easier to do that, because I don't believe that from a clinical process or a to market process, there's a great deal of difference with these companies. They all tend to do things in pretty much the same way.
Right. Well, it's highly regulated, so yeah, they kind of have to follow the rules, right?
You would hope so.
So we're coming up on a half an hour. This has gone by a lot faster than they always go by fast, but this has been really pretty interesting. So I don't know if everybody realized that, Armen, I don't know if you realize that Gary he's an avid cyclist. He goes like on 100-mile rides. He sent me a picture once of I think it was a brown bear crossing in front, and you made the news because of this. And he does this really weird Thanksgiving when he's in the U.S. bike ride from like his house to where they're doing what is that, like 50 miles in the snow or some nonsense that you do?
Well, that's now it's really good. But number one, we don't have brown bears in Massachusetts. It's black bear. So I think we really have to get the record right there.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, if you look me up on Strava, you can see that picture where the bear ran in front of me. Someone
I was looking for it. I was looking for the picture because I think you texted it, but I can't find it because I was going to share it on this. And if you send it to us,
I absolutely will.
We'll have our producer cut it in so that people can see you wrangling with the bear.
Yeah, it's actually cool. Alive. It's alive as well, so you can even get the animation of it.
Yeah.
Did you have to negotiate with the bear a little bit?
I have to say it was a very beautiful experience. It was a beautiful animal, and I started screaming at it because I wanted to scare it. I thought it's my duty to make this bear afraid of roads. So I'll be as scary as I possibly could, and it ran off. Of course, the bear could easily kill me if I wanted to. Black bears can easily do that, but they tend to be more avoidant than anything.
Well, hopefully we'll get the video and we'll show it. But
Yes,
basically,
yes,
you
I'd be
can
glad to
see
share it.
somebody behind Gary in a car shot the video, because you see him, you see the bear, you see him on a bike, and then it's being shot, right? So
Yeah,
it's kind
it
of
was on the local news that night, the Boston
That's
News.
pretty cool.
exactly. So and your Thanksgiving ride, just that you do that, right? It's like freezing cold, and
It
what
can
is it,
be. There's
50
been quite a
miles,
few years where it's
25
been
miles?
really, really cold, but most recently it hasn't been that bad. But yeah, I tend to do that. I usually make it longer so I can justify eating more during Thanksgiving.
Of course. So
I
how
go the
long is
long
it?
way.
What's the long way?
The long way would be 65 miles, but that's exactly 100 kilometers actually.
So do you ride first and then eat later, or I would
Ride first,
assume?
eat later, of course, yeah.
Yeah, he rides to the dinner, so he has motivation. Let's get
That's
this done.
good.
Come on, I gotta go eat.
Yeah, burn all the calories first.
Pumpkin pie is
Exactly.
waiting for me. Well, Gary, hey man, I appreciate you you spending a little time with us, talking about some of the work that you've done. It's pretty awesome.
you
I
for
think it's
asking
very
me.
interesting.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
glad to
for
share.
joining us here.
All right. Well, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy Europe, Belfast, and we'll talk to you soon, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Whew. Gary is always an interesting guy to talk to. He always provides a lot of, I mean, it's always very technical, but I think a lot of what he talked about in terms of the event-based architecture and making sure if you're looking at systems that they can actually be integrated, using that strategy is super important.
It's very close to home for me, and definitely a fun person to talk to. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, man. That's another good one. We'll see you again soon. All right, man.
Yes.
Take it easy.
See you later.
Bye.
Subscribe for more insights from leading CGT experts.